Deepak, thank you so much for your time. So wonderful to see you here in Australia.
Thank you. It's great to be with you again.
Well, since we last spoke in September, the US election took place. You're passionate about not just spiritual well-being, but health as well. We've seen Donald Trump announce RFK as his health secretary. Obesity is a major problem in America. Do you have confidence that RFK will make a change and will be able to tackle this?
I find RFK full of contradiction and paradox. His views on nutrition, health and well-being are actually quite good. However, you see him gorging on McDonald's.
On the private jet.
On the private jet. He doesn't look like the perfect example of, somebody who could tackle obesity himself. And he has other views which, of course, are also controversial, like, the whole vaccine conspiracy and the fact that vaccines cause autism, for which there's no proof. I know that a lot of people have very strong opinions about these matters, especially vaccines. And yes, vaccines could have certain side effects, but so does everything. And for a person who grew up in India, where I saw people dying of polio, of smallpox, even measles, tuberculosis, I saw people on respirators, friends and relatives who lost their lives. It's very difficult for anyone to convince me that vaccines don't prevent some kinds of very devastating diseases. So having said that, America elected Mr. Trump, and America basically was quite honest in the fact that they want him as their leader, and if he chooses a cabinet with the likes of RFK and what's his name, Matt Gaetz, who's been accused of all kinds of things, including sex trafficking, then that's what apparently is the face of America right now. And I'm sure everyone who's been guilty of things like this, first will start with Mr. Trump pardoning himself and then his colleagues, but why not pardon all the other people in prison right now? It just seems very strange to me, and I have decided personally to totally disengage from politics. It's not that,
Just in America or globally?
In general, because, the politics by itself, the more I look at it, is all about power mongering, influence peddling, cronyism, corruption, follow the money trail, and very male-dominated across the board. And so, but it is what it is. So, we have to accept these facts, that whoever the president is, and lawfully and legally elected, must reflect the values of the country. And if these are the values of America, so be it.
Well, I think it reflects this result in America, this disillusionment with the working class, with the political and media elite. Trump represents the opposite to that. So, do you think we are seeing a movement or an uprising by the working class against the values, the ideology that has been foisted on them?
I see that the working class is disenchanted, and I feel very strongly that they're justified, because they're marginalized. The working people are marginalized. But I don't see this administration as being their champion, because if anything, the rich are going to get richer with all their tax cuts, and the very people that have hope in this new administration are going to be left out. And I'm not saying that the other side could have been better.
Yeah.
You know, it's just that it's the nature of bipartisan politics for politicians to look out for themselves, period. You know, and if you look at the history of the world, this is what it is. It's all about power, war, influence peddling, cronyism, but also about, it's about money, basically. The medical industrial complex, the news industrial complex, the weapons industrial complex. The world is driven by money, and politicians are driven by money. I've rarely come across a politician who wants to serve. I mean, I'm not familiar with the politics globally, but the very few people have been like, say, a Nelson Mandela or a Martin Luther King Jr. or a Mahatma Gandhi. Now, time and again, some people like that crop up, but I don't see it right now.
Yeah, just in Australia, there's been big scandal recently with our Prime Minister getting free upgrades, to business class flights, and he bought a clifftop mansion, and people say, well, we're in a cost of living crisis. What message does this send?
But it's universal, Sharri. It's not Australia, it's not America, it's universal. And by and large, when you have women leaders occasionally coming up, they have to compete with these guys, and so they become like them too. It's the history. If you read history and you look at, say, Plato's Republic, he wasn't actually a fan of democracy. He said democracy is the rule of the mob because it caters to the lowest level of survival and safety, and politicians will do anything to satisfy them. They'll play the victim, they'll be nice, they'll be manipulative, they'll be stubborn. So democracy was not something that actually Plato favored. He did not favor autocracy or even royalty because he thought that led to tyranny. So his solution in the Republic was what he called philosopher-statesmen, who first have to be reflective statesmen, philosophers, servant leaders to even qualify to run. That was the Republic 2,500 years ago.
Have to be very dedicated.
And it hasn't happened, and
No.
I don't see it happening.
I mean, you think of modernization of the Western world, and, it lifted entire classes of people out of poverty. But now, in a sense, we're seeing the reverse because we've had this inflation and cost of living crisis around the world. We're seeing greater wealth inequality. The inequality between those who are well off and those who have nothing is only growing. So perhaps we're seeing a return to people who can't afford to live in the world that we've created. Where, people are being pushed back down into that.
Let's be honest, the world is racist, bigoted, full of prejudice, and conditioned by stories, ideologies, and everybody feels that their story is the right story. So if you're asking me if there's a solution, there isn't. I mean, seems to be human nature. And so for a person like me who's dedicated my life to a vision of a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world, I'm disconnected. I'm not engaged. I'm even answering these questions is very uncomfortable for me because there will be some people who will be enraged no matter what I say. Some people will be happy with what I say, but it doesn't matter. What I say does not matter. I've decided I, as a human being, will pursue peace and justice and health and joy. And I hope there are other people like that who want to be the change they want to see in the world. But I actually don't see it happening in my generation. So,
very pessimistic view
I think
of the
pessimism is the wrong word. Realistic.
Well, let's change tack then. You've said that the next 20 years are beyond human imagination. What sort of age do you think we're entering now?
Well, look at all the ages we've been through. You know, we started as hunter-gatherers, then we discovered language, and then we became also tool makers, very primitive tools, but then there was the agricultural revolution, there was the industrial revolution, there was the age of technology, there's the digital age, and now the age of AI. It's all a slow progression. Between the years 1886 and 1903, you had the availability of the light bulb, the automobile, airplanes, and the telephone. So let's say you were in 1885, you were shipwrecked and you were in some island, remote island, and then 20 years later, you showed up, somebody rescued you. The world you would see in 1906 would not have been imagined in 1885, in 20 years.
Completely different, yeah.
Okay, so now with large language models, particularly AI, when we have access to the language of biology, the language of physics, the language of mathematics, the language of history, the language of economics, the language of anthropology, language of philosophy, religion, science, all that put together, that knowledge base that no single human being has is going to leapfrog our cultural and our social evolution in a way that we can't imagine. But something even more interesting, it's going to leapfrog our biological evolution, because, you know, our biology is shaped by experiences that we have. And now AI is just the beginning. Soon you'll have, already have, VR, virtual reality. You have extended reality. You have augmented reality. You have immersive experiences. You have holographic appearances, immersive. And so the entire ecosystem of our experience is going to change in a way that we never imagined. And that's going to change the neural landscape of our brain, our cognitive and our perceptual abilities. And everything I've mentioned, you know, like war, terrorism, eco-destruction, extinction of species, social economic injustice, chronic disease, all of that is solvable. We now know...
Chronic disease, you think is solvable? Cancer?
Yeah, 95% of cancer and chronic illness is now known to be epigenetic, which means environmental. And we know what the factors are. And it's not just the external environment, it's also our internal environment, our thoughts, our senses, you know, how we perceive things, how we fear things, hostility, anger, guilt, shame, depression, anxiety, toxins in our food, toxins in our relationships, toxins in our politics. But we do know the mechanisms, okay? So climate change is reversible. 95% of disease is what is called epigenetic. 5% of disease is due to mutations that are fully penetrant, which means they're irreversible. Like if somebody has a BRCA gene, the gene for breast cancer, they're going to get cancer no matter what. So a good example of that is Angelina Jolie, who had a preventive mastectomy, which was the right thing to do. But as we look at the near future with AI, with messenger RNA, with the new vaccines that are being developed, with epigenetics and the on-off switches in our gene networks and how they behave, even the 5% of disease that's fully determined genetically, something called gene editing is around the horizon. And gene editing is already approved for things like sickle cell anemia and 1 or 2 neurodegenerative disorders. But I guarantee you that in the next few years, you'll have gene editing for chronic disease, cancer. You'll have epigenetic modulation and behavioral medicine for the other 95%. And so, yeah, chronic disease could become optional, and we could live long lives and healthy lives. Now, that's
something to be optimistic
very
about.
Very optimistic about. The dark side is, will we sleepwalk our way to extinction in the meanwhile with mechanized death and climate change? As you know, a lot of politicians, particularly in the United States, deny even the existence of climate change. So we are at a crossroads. One road leads to sleepwalking to extinction. The other could lead to a more peaceful, just, sustainable, healthier, and joyful world. And so if you want to be optimistic, then you have to favor the road less traveled.
Yeah. You've predicted that we could, in our future, even see a new evolution in our species, metahuman. What do you mean by that?
I wrote a book called Metahuman, and that's the idea that as we extend our cognitive and perceptual experiences through technologies that are mentioned, including immersive experiences, then we will have access to perceptual and cognitive experiences that right now are alien to us. So, what we call the objective world, what we call this world, this look out the window, you see this world, this is a human projection based on human sensory experiences. What does that look like to an insect with 100 eyes? What does the world look like to a snake that navigates the experience of infrared, or some birds that navigate through electromagnetic signals in the quantum field, or through or species that hear the echo of ultrasound? Imagine having access to these experiences. That would be metahuman, that you could switch on into a metaverse of human experience that you couldn't have imagined. Right now what we see is a human experience based on a human brain and the 5 human senses that access a sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum. But imagine if we opened ourselves through these technologies into this field of possibilities. Now, having said that, in Eastern wisdom traditions, we already live in a virtual reality. So what you see is the objective world is a human projection, a human illusion, a human fluctuation of consciousness, but that's a species-specific experience. Imagine extending the range of experience to all the species that we have. Imagine talking to whales. Imagine having communication with birds. Imagine intra-species ecosystems with bubbles of experience that are beyond the usual imaginary experience. Imagine extrasensory perception. Imagine looking at the future. Imagine knowing the past. Imagine accessing what the Eastern wisdom traditions call the Akashic field, which is basically the fundamental consciousness field that appears as this multiverse. I could go on and on about this. This is my passion, has been for last 40 years, but when I speak of these things, people roll up their eyes. But I go back to this example, being born, disappearing in 1885, showing up in 1906, 2 different worlds. Imagine what the world was to hunter-gatherers. Only 50,000 years ago, we walked out of the jungle as the upright primates, and we discovered fire. If we hadn't, there wouldn't be the steam engine. If there wasn't the steam engine, there wouldn't be the industrial age. If there wasn't the internet, there wouldn't be the digital age. If there wasn't the digital age, there wouldn't be AI. If there was AI, there wouldn't be VR, XR, AR, immersive experiences, holography.
Way leads on to way.
One we are leapfrogging into a world we never imagined.
Yeah.
But there's a dark side to it. Every technology comes with the dark side. Nuclear weapons, cyber
Indeed.
warfare, cyber hacking, biological warfare.
It's a dangerous time
drones.
in the world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dangerous time in the world. On an individual level, you hear most people say they feel busier than they ever have been. They don't have enough time for their loved ones. What do you suggest when people come to you with this problem?
Yeah, I think only busy people have time. People who say, I don't have time, they're just distracted. If you're totally focused on what you're doing in the moment and you're present, there's no fatigue. Fatigue is when you think about the future, anticipate the future, or you regret the past. But when you bring presence to any experience, there's absolutely no fatigue. So that's the way we were meant to be. Zebras, as somebody said, some neuroscientist said, zebras don't get ulcers and animals don't get stressed only in the moment. You go to Africa, you go to the safari, you'll see that the gazelles are panic when they're being chased by a tiger, but as soon as one of them has been caught, they all relax once again. They don't ruminate. If you kick a dog, the dog will of course be hurt, and the dog will remember the injury. You meet the dog 5 years later, the dog might attack you, but unlike a human being, it won't ruminate for 5 years how to get even. So we have these things like wanting to get even, regretting the past, anticipating the future, anger as the memory of trauma, hostility as the desire to get even, guilt and shame, blaming ourselves, and fear about the future, and the fear of death, all of that. These are human traits that no other species has. We're very contradictory, paradoxical species. On the one hand, we have all this immense creativity, and on the other hand, we are messing up the universe that gave us existence.
But on an individual level, staying present is the key.
Be present.
Be present.
This is the only moment you have.
In Australia, like in many other global cities, we've seen a lot of social unrest. We've seen aggressive protesters, violence, anti-Semitism, hatred. A lot of my viewers, in particular, have been very distressed over the past year because of the anti-Semitism, this increase in racism that we're seeing. What's your advice for us when we're trying to cope in this tumultuous time?
You have to be the change you want to see in the world. I'm at peace with all that, just so you know. In my tradition, there are 4 phases in life. They're called four ashrams, which means the 4 places you identify as home. So the first 25 years is education, the second 25 years is fame and fortune, third 25 years is giving back, and now I've entered the 4th, which is preparing for death and self-realization and being at peace. So I'm at peace.
But what's your advice for my viewers who are dealing with this anti-Semitism, this racism?
Hang out with people who are not racist. Be peaceful yourself. Don't be racist. And hang out with people like that. And then create your own communities. There are 3 things you can do. One is create your own ecosystem, community of service, community, and of a spiritual bond. Social scientists say that if we have shared vision, maximum diversity, complement everybody's strengths, and create a spiritual and emotional bond, then you can create a community which is peaceful and just, and has affection and attention and appreciation and gratitude as their basic values. And there are communities like that. I've created a community called neveralone.love. You can go to it. It's basically creating communities globally, online and offline, for people who practice three things. Seva, which is service, selfless service. Sangha, which is spiritual practice and meditation. And Sangha, which means community. Seva, which means service. And then sadhana, which means spiritual practice.
Just a moment ago you said that you think you're in the fourth stage of your life
Yes.
now, peace and preparing for death or what comes next.
Yes.
Do you think you'll be reincarnated?
That's a very difficult question because everything recycles, information recycles, and energy recycles. So I believe that if reincarnation is the recycling of consciousness, then consciousness recycles. But what recycles? I don't believe there's such a thing as an individual. If you say, who's Deepak? Well, which Deepak? The baby, the toddler, the teenager, the young adult, the mature adult, all the way to dusty death. There's no fixed identity. So I don't, where I am in my life, I'm at peace that I don't have a fixed identity. There's no Deepak. There is a consciousness for now behaving like an entity with a story that's called Deepak. But ultimately my liberation will be from my identity as Deepak. So what we call enlightenment in Eastern traditions is not of the person, it is from the person. So I'm preparing to detach from this entity called Deepak.
But not now, not anytime soon. You're young still.
I feel very healthy and I am very healthy, but I do realize that my ego identity is an illusion.
Just finally, what's your best advice for staying healthy both mentally and physically?
Don't resist existence. Go with the flow. You have no choice. The moment you resist existence in this moment, you'll be distressed.
What do you mean by that?
Recognize the impermanence of your existence. I once saw a grave site where there was a sign. It said, there was a sign on the grave
Yes.
site. It said, where you are, I once was, and where I am, you will soon be. So accept that impermanence. Once you accept impermanence, every moment is precious.
It is indeed. Well, thank you for spending your precious moments with me here,
Thank you.
Deepak. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.